Hey everybody, today is Monday, February 13th, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from the indie film To Leslie, editor Chris McCaleb.
There's a Leslie in a lot of our lives, and for me, it's very close to home, and I sobbed reading the script, and I said, I want to do this 100%. Like with everything, it's all about the story and it's all about the characters and the performances, but more than any other thing I've ever worked on, every cut was about protecting this performance. I've worked for some very challenging people, directors in my life, and I learned from all of them, if this sounds like, oh God, what a jerk, it wasn't like that at all.
Yes, all of that and a lot more on this edition of The Rough Cut. All right, how's everybody doing today? Good, I hope. How could you not be? And if you aren't now, you will be soon, because today we get to talk with another incredible editor, the pride of Pima County, Arizona himself, Mr. Chris McCaleb. This will be Chris's third time on The Rough Cut, and if I have anything to say about it, certainly not his last. I love talking about editing with Chris, and it doesn't hurt that he's edited shows like Halt and Catch Fire, Breaking Bad, and Better Call Saul. I mean, come on, those are some pretty top-shelf TV shows right there. But Chris has never edited a feature until now. But what a way to start. Perhaps you've heard of this film called To Leslie. I admit, until recently, I had not. And then all hell broke loose regarding the Oscar campaigning that went on for its star, actress Andrea Riseborough. It seems that many notable actors found her performance to be quite compelling, enough so that they started what could be considered a grassroots campaign to get her a nomination for Best Actress. And you know what? It worked. And you know what else? She deserves it. At least as much as anyone does. All this award stuff for creative endeavors is, of course, subjective. I mean, it's art after all. But still, this campaigning caused a little bit of controversy. There was even an investigation by the Academy, whatever that means. I had no idea there were even specific rules or guidelines around campaigning. It's certainly something I never gave any thought to, but now with this whole To Leslie situation, I think more people are paying attention to how the Academy and its members do business. Because it is a business. You know, you can't have show business without the business. So putting aside the usual reasons why I'm always up for talking to Chris, he has an insider perspective on both this award season campaigning stuff, as well as making this really terrific movie. And that's the thing you don't want to be lost in all of this. The movie is very well done with some amazing performances. Yes, Andrea Riseborough's performance as the title character, an alcoholic woman who won the lottery and then lost it all and then some, it's beautiful. But hers is not the only great performance in the movie. Owen Teague, who plays her son, he's awesome. And comedian Mark Maron is incredible as the motel owner that takes a chance on Leslie when she was pretty much out of chances. And then you have Allison Janney and Stephen Root, they're always amazing. And then you have Chris McCaleb's work in bringing together all of those performances, which of course is top-notch. Now I'm guessing you haven't seen the film yet because most people haven't, but you should. And you don't need to see it first before listening to this interview with Chris, but hopefully hearing Chris talk about all that went into making this micro-budget movie will make you want to see it as soon as you can. So, that was quite a build-up, and I should probably shut up and get right to the interview, but you know I got to do a little business of my own first. And that is to give a quick shout-out to our friends and sponsor, Extreme Music. Now, every week I talk to you about the importance of great music in your film or TV show, and that's not always easy to pull off when it comes to tight budgets and tricky licenses. Take it from To Leslie editor Chris McCaleb himself.
This is, again, a very low-budget movie. They had to go back and ask for more money for some of the music because music licensing can be very expensive. And I think a lot of people who see the movie would think, well, holy cow, they had a huge music budget.
So do you want people to see your movie or TV show and think, wow, they must have had a huge music budget, even when you don't? Of course you do. And the best way to do that is to bring your production audio needs to Extreme Music. For decades, they have been serving up top-shelf tracks to storytellers like you, all lovingly crafted by the best musicians, producers, and composers in the business. Their website, extrememusic.com, in case you couldn't guess, provides an oh-so-simple-to-use search engine where you can dial in your dream tracks right down to things like tempo and instrumentation. And for the musically challenged of you who don't know how to express things like that, you can just upload a reference track to Extreme Music, and they'll use their incredible intuition to find you ones like it. And yes, licensing can be tricky, but not with Extreme Music. You can do it all right there in their website, or they have real people, real nice people, who can lend you a hand if you need it. So the next time you have a story to tell it with great production audio from Extreme Music. All right, I know you're going to like this one. Chris always comes to play, and we got a lot to play with today. From To Leslie, that little indie film that's been making big waves, here is editor Chris McCaleb.
All happen on your end.
It's all right here, baby.
Okay, cool.
All you gotta do is sit back and be cool.
Cool.
Yeah, see, you did it already.
Perfect.
All right, Mr. McCaleb. You know how, like, when you're working on a movie or a TV show, like, throughout almost all of post, the story is one way, and then at the last minute, like, you move a flashback and totally change everything?
Sometimes, yeah.
Just play along. That's kind of happening here today. Like, up until about an hour ago, I would say, I was sure I was going to save the Oscars controversy stuff until the end, but then I reconsidered, and I feel like we should hit that up top.
Mm-hmm.
We always have that much more to talk about during award season. And now, thanks to you and the cast and crew of To Leslie, we have that much more to talk about. Before we even do that, let's tick off your bona fides. 3-time Emmy nominee, 3-time Eddie nominee, and one of those resulted in an Eddie win.
That's true.
And lest we forget, you were nominated in 2008 for a Streamy for Sorority Fever.
Sorority Forever, Matt. Come on. I mean, let's...
Sorority Forever?
That's right. Sorority Fever makes me sound like a creep. Sorority Forever, on the other hand.
Hey, that aside, I think because of the circumstance with the Oscars, more people are aware of To Leslie than probably have actually seen it, which is a shame because it is a fantastic film with beautiful performances. Your hope is that this, if you want to call it a controversy, results in more people going out and watching the film. So let's just start there and talk about this whole award season promotion situation. And that's my whole question right there. It's not even a question.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring it up like right at the top, because as we're recording, not to get too into the weeds of how the sausage is made, but as we're recording last night, the show was mentioned in a joke on Saturday Night Live, which is crazy. You know, the joke part is that nobody's ever heard of this movie. And you know, it's been a real education because, I mean, you know, it's a super low budget movie, independently financed, made in 19 days during December 2020, you know, in LA, like the height of a surge. And to have been on the journey of this, to get to this point, to have it be eventually purchased by a very small distributor who just didn't have the resources, the financial resources to give the film a proper release with any kind of promotion. With, I mean, if you saw an ad for To Leslie, like you was almost by accident, like maybe you stumbled onto my Instagram profile, which I you know, thanks for coming, but it's so, and that extended through to the awards component of a release. And that's been a whole other interesting thing to kind of witness because, you know, studios and networks, they spend millions of dollars with these targeted ads at people in the Academy, whether it's the Motion Picture Academy, the Television Academy, even ACE. You know, they spend, you know, if any member of ACE knows that, or the Editors Guild also, you get bombarded for months with these for your consideration emails. And those things all represent a financial spend to try and say, hey, let me put your eyes on this thing that you may or may not have heard of. So you may even think like, well, why does a huge movie, why does Avatar, Way of the Water, why do they need to spend money? It's like asking, why does Coca-Cola advertise? You'd think, oh, everybody knows Coke. Coke's never going away. Well, they want to make sure that it never goes away, and that's why they advertise. And so it's been very interesting because this movie, not only did it not have a real, like, strong release. I mean, the joke that was on Saturday Night Live is how, you know, tiny the box office was. It came out for a week in a handful of theaters, although strangely, many in the state of Arizona where I grew up, as you know, Matt.
I know. It
was playing in 2 theaters in Tucson, where I grew up. It was playing in 1 theater in Los Angeles, the motion picture capital of at least the United States. So it's very frustrating because we knew making the movie, and if you've seen the movie, which I hope you have, I hope you will. If you're in ACE, I paid my own money to put it on the ACE viewing platform, and while it didn't get nominated, I believe it's still up there, and I would hope that people would still have a chance to take a look at it.
It is.
Yeah, because it's that, which is really all I cared about. I want people to see it because we're all really proud of it, and this performance that Andrea Riseborough gives, this controversial performance now, is so great, and it was so great from day one, and to have a light shined on that, who knows what the correct way to say that is. But to have, that sort of a spotlight put on that, I think is really great. And I think it's really frustrating that it was called into question because this film, which had absolutely no awards budget, that there was a grassroots campaign, a word of mouth campaign with, people saying, hey, please watch this movie. Please see this performance. This actress is incredible. And, there have been so many jokes about it, but it really did happen in a very organic way. And it also, people talk about that it was this like targeted time, but it wasn't. It was months and months of actors seeing this performance, and actors love acting and actors love talking about acting. And Andrea is like an actor's actor. So I think people rightly and genuinely were so impressed and bowled over by her that they started hosting these screenings of it at, agencies and stuff, places that don't cost money necessarily to rent. And so, yeah, so that's that. So it's been very, I felt very good that the Academy, they did some kind of investigation, I guess, and they determined that, it's all on, she's keeping the nomination. And I think obviously I think that that's the right decision, but it's been very interesting, even from my seat of, I know that people in ACE, they don't necessarily know me as a person who cuts movies. This is the first feature that I've cut, and which is why they don't know me as someone who cuts features. And, I've cut a lot of television, which I love. And I didn't think, I'm going to get a nomination, nor was I really after that necessarily. But it was interesting to see how much I would need to put into it personally without any support from a studio or a network, how much I would need to put into the marketing of myself or the marketing of the project financially. And I didn't do that, nor kind of could I, because it's sort of set up to where you really need to have like a studio apparatus or a PR apparatus behind you. And, I don't have either of those on To Leslie. So all I could do is just try to get more eyeballs on the film. And if anything, I think it's really good that it sparked a conversation about, well, what are these awards and what do they mean, and how does that process work? And I've always said that just the nomination for me is the award.
Yeah.
I really think that that's true, particularly, when it's your peers, when it's especially something like ACE, which I have been very fortunate to have been nominated, a number of times, and like you said, won one with Joey Liu, and that's an incredible honor. But I'll say that for real, the honor is getting nominated. But it's been very interesting getting kind of like a ground level view of how that process works, especially on a movie like this, which is like, again, it's kind of an unconventional movie. As Saturday Night Live said, nobody had heard of until a couple weeks ago. So,
to be honest, I had never heard of it until you emailed me, and then all of a sudden the floodgates opened, and it's like you can't get away from this movie in terms of what's going on with it.
Right.
You talked about the honor of just being nominated.
Mm-hmm.
I asked another ACE editor, Doc Krotzer, this the other day, and it certainly seems appropriate now. And the question was, why are awards or nominations important to the career of an editor, and how can they make an impact? And he was unsure of that. He didn't really know how to come out with a definitive answer on that, but maybe I'll give you a shot and give us your take on what a nomination or an award can do for an editor's career.
Oh, absolutely. I think I think that, I mean, from my own experience, I would say first of all, it raises your visibility immensely. It puts your name out there and it says, hey, this person is doing really good work. And then forever, you have that on your resume. And as a tool of negotiating, whether it's salary, whether it's even just getting onto a job, having that kind of laurel, let alone a win, but also even just the nomination, it's an accolade that says to producers, let's take this person maybe more seriously than we take this other person who doesn't have that nomination. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong at all. I'm not, and nor am I saying that's fair or unfair. I'm just, if the question is how does a nomination help your career, I think it's in terms of being taken seriously and being able to get a seat at the table, particularly when you're starting out or when you're early in your career. If you happen to gain the attention of a nominating body, it can be enormously helpful. But I think it can be helpful at any stage. And then it also it extends your network of people. Speaking specifically about ACE, in this phenomenal community of editors, it puts you in conversations often with legends, and you're suddenly, it's unavoidable. You're just right next to Steve Rifkin and you're having a conversation. You're right next to Hank Corwin and you're having a conversation. And, I mean, if you really want to ask somebody how can a nomination affect your career, I would ask Tom Cross, a brilliant editor who has benefited, I would say, enormously from his association with the films that he did with Damien Chazelle. And he's a brilliant editor. But I would be interested in his take on how nominations affect your career.
Well, maybe I can patch that in after the fact.
We're calling you out, Tom.
You'll be thrilled. Let's do a little compare and contrast. I mean,
Sure.
You've spent much of your career working on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, which I'm sure do have very well-oiled publicity machines supporting them. On something like Better Call Saul, do you have meetings with publicity people? Do they disseminate what the campaign strategy is going to be? Or is it really that tactical, or just something that you're doing your job and one day they call you and say, hey, you want to talk to this idiot with a podcast?
No, I think that you'd be surprised sometimes how not calculated a campaign might be. I don't believe there was any marketing done for the final season of Better Call Saul for awards, at least as they relate to the editing categories. And I made my own kind of for your consideration video just on Instagram and Twitter, really just because it was fun. And I'm really proud of the work that we did on this, on all of it. But this particular episode, which nearly broke us, it was really, really incredibly difficult. Episode 610, Nippy, if you have seen it.
Yeah, sure.
And also I like to, I cut that with Joey Liu again. And, I like to share credit whenever I can. And, it's like as I probably said it on the podcast before, it's like Kelly Dixon says, sending the elevator back down. Everybody needs a helping hand in getting, advancing their career. And I've had that, and I like to do that for as many people as I possibly can. And so I wanted to shine a light on that as well. But I did that myself. And I didn't see any emails at all for your consideration for Better Call Saul, which is fine. And again, I am not an awards hungry, person. And like I said, I've been very, very fortunate in my career to have worked even at this point on stuff that has been recognized in that way. And that's amazing. But I think that you'd be surprised. It's not always as well-oiled or as, drawn out as you think. The main thing that happens is this, the network would reach out and say, which ones do you want? What episode do you want to submit? That's pretty much the extent of it.
Okay.
At least of our involvement with their process.
The other thing that's really got everybody talking, I guess, is you talk about, there's some rules were broken. What were the rules? You even talked about that. Well, there was an investigation. Well, what were the questions? I mean, there's a lot of the stuff you just never think about. It's award season. Everyone gets all excited about these different performances, but you don't think about the machine that goes on behind it. And you don't think about that there may be rules to some of this. Had you ever heard of any kind of guidelines or rules about how this stuff is supposed to work or not work?
Not at all. And I mean, again, I'm not a part of the Film Academy, at least not yet. But so I can't speak internally to how that stuff worked, but I can tell you what I've read in articles, because I was certainly following it, because people would send me the articles, and knowing that I was involved in the film. And from what I understand, there's like a sub rule of a sub rule that has language saying that if you're campaigning on behalf of someone, you're not allowed to mention other people's names. And I guess the equivalent would be if you were posting on social media on my behalf, and then you were like, eat it, Steve Rivkin, and I'm not changing the name of my podcast either.
Great, I'm going to get an email from him. Thanks.
I'll hype it. By the way, Steve Rivkin is also a genius.
He's brilliant.
Yeah, these are all jokes. I hope that's obvious, but I have enormous admiration for him. And but like I think that is, I think that what it sounds like is that certain people in social media posts, by mentioning another actor, they're violating some very arcane rule that maybe nobody, some like formality. And what it seems like the Academy found is that maybe they need to revisit their rules, whether it's to clarify what is and isn't allowed, but also I think perhaps to reshape in a nuanced way the guidelines in a more connected era, in the era of social media, where some of these, like an influencer or a famous actor, for example, they often, with a single Instagram post or tweet, they can command more eyeballs than a television network, than putting an ad on the Super Bowl. There are certain people that can post things, and they not only do more people see it, but more people engage with it. And on top of that, they're the people that you actually are hoping will see it in, if you're looking for actors, let's say, you want your big actors, I'm sure that a lot of actors follow other actors. If any actors are actually on social media, like reading things, I don't know. I can't speak to the actors or what they do, what their proclivities are. But yeah, it's a whole new era. And I'm sure somebody will, like every year, somebody says it's the Wild West, which I don't know when it's going to stop being the Wild West. But, I think that's something that you're going to see in the next year, is just kind of maybe a reshaping or a streamlining of guidelines to just make sure that everybody knows when they are or are not in violation of something.
You just said, I think it's a new era. I think it's exactly right. I think this whole issue, the process, the architecture of this thing is behind the times. It hasn't really caught up with what's possible. And as you said, an Instagram post can reach 1 million people. It's not much different than
or 40
if it's mine. Yeah.
40 million. Oh no, I'm saying 40 million. It is a whole new world. But again, there are little rules. Like I didn't know when I was 18 years old, first time I ever got pulled over by a cop, I didn't know you have to come to a complete stop before you pull out of a parking lot onto a road. Even if there's nobody there, you have to come, not even a rolling stop, a complete stop. Did you know that? I didn't. And I learned it because a policeman told me. So
I think we'll just skate past the part about where you said the first time I was stopped, and we'll move on with our discussion. There's just so much we could talk about with the award season stuff, but I really do want to get into the film because at the end of the day, the performances are incredible and the work that you all did was fantastic. And I consider myself lucky in that because of this controversy and because you were forced to do some outreach on your own, that I got to see the film. And it's just really, I watched it again this morning.
Oh, wow.
I think I said to you, the thing about her performances is she disappears. Like she's not there anymore.
No.
It's this character.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into this is your first feature that you're cutting, lead editing. Mm-hmm. It's also Michael Morris's directorial debut in features, I believe.
That's correct.
Just going off my notes.
That's correct.
Yeah, and you've known him, I think, for a while. He did a couple episodes of Halt and Catch Fire, which I know you worked on, and he certainly did a few Better Call Sauls.
We met for the first time in season 4 of Better Call Saul, but we didn't work together until season 5. He directed episode 503, which, if you're a fan of Better Call Saul, is the one that the teaser of the episode was the ants.
The ice cream.
Going up the ice cream cone. So that was in 2019. And, sometimes you work with someone or you meet someone and you just have an instant simpatico. We just had that, and which was really amazing. I mean, he's a extraordinarily brilliant filmmaker and also just one of the best people that I know. And I'm fortunate to know some very, very excellent best people. And I'm very, very lucky that way. But we struck up a friendship that extended beyond the 4 days that we got to work together. He got me into virtual reality stuff. He really got me hooked on the Oculus Quest. It had just come out, the first Oculus Quest, and we talked a lot about that, and we were talking about some projects that we might want to do together. And in fact, we had a meeting on March 12th, 2020, and we were out and about having a meeting, and he even remarked, I don't think we're going to be meeting in public like this for very much longer. And 3 days later, every restaurant and business was closed for, many, many months. We all remember 2020. But we stayed in touch throughout it, and I got deeply into VR, which was kind of a godsend. With my group of friends, when we couldn't see each other in real life, we could go and we could gather in VR. There's an incredible app called Big Screen, which if you have VR, it's like a movie theater or like different, movie screening rooms and stuff. And the light is interactive. It feels like you're really in a movie theater. It's a 3-dimensional space and everybody is like a cartoon avatar, but you sound like yourself. You can like turn around and look, and I don't know why I'm physically moving. It's only for you, Matt.
It helps me, so don't worry about it.
Yeah. And you can like high five people, and the haptic response on the joysticks. It felt in a very lonely and isolated time. It felt like we could actually be together. And anyway, so Michael and I continued talking as I got deeper and deeper into VR, and then later in the year, in 2020. The financing for this movie that he had been trying to get made for years, it finally came through, and he contacted me and he said, hey, would you ever be interested in cutting a feature? I just think that he was very complimentary, just thought that I had the right touch for it, and he thought I would respond to the material, which I absolutely did. It sounds like so many people on the crew, when we read the script, had a similar reaction, which is there's a Leslie in a lot of our lives. And for me, it's very close to home. And I sobbed reading the script, and I said, I want to do this 100%. And I think he may have had to convince the producers and financiers, maybe, I've never cut a movie, but he really believed in me. And it came through, and, started shooting shortly after Thanksgiving, and shot on film, which is very unusual these days.
I was thinking that when you're talking about, we went down the VR rabbit hole, I'm thinking, yeah, and then you guys went out and shot this indie film where you're just really strapped for cash. You shot it on film. Mm-hmm. What's the reasoning there? I
don't want to speak entirely for Michael, but here I go. I think for him, it was about the aesthetic of film, and there's a life to film that you can't really replicate, even with filters or with the DI process. You can emulate the look of film, but because it's a photochemical process, it is alive. There's a reaction that's happening, and there are just little things that are unpredictable, I guess.
Yeah.
And, you open yourself up to surprises. And I think also you kind of, because it's so much more expensive to shoot on film, it focuses what you're doing. And it, in some ways, limits your options. But in other ways, I think it can help you focus on what's important versus just like plastering the room with angles and putting 5 cameras up, which, if you're shooting a big action sequence and 5, 10 cameras, totally, I understand that. But for a film like this, which is very intimate and it's very much about this one woman's experience, and if you haven't seen the movie, it's a drama. It's about this alcoholic single mother who 6 years ago won like a local lottery. She won $190,000 and she blew through it and she abandoned her son and left town. And 6 years later, she has to return home to pick up the pieces of her life. And I promise you that there's fun stuff in it. It's not just an overwhelming downer from start to finish. There's a lot of hope. There are a lot of beautiful moments. There are laughs. And there are these incredible performances. And it's a beautifully shot movie, going back to why film. Larkin Seipel, the director of photography, who also shot Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is also just an extraordinarily beautiful film in a completely different way. They couldn't look less similar. He is another just extraordinary talent. And he also operated. And the way that they described it, I've heard them describe it, is it's almost like he was doing a dance with Andrea, who plays Leslie. And if you see the film, I think that not only the format of actual film, but the way that it was shot, the handheld, the dance that the DP/operator was doing with the characters, it really informs the feeling of the movie and your perception of the film. So I think that's why film.
Well, I've heard that notion before about shooting on film sort of applies a certain discipline, in production where, like we don't have all day to just, as you said, put the camera in every different part of the room and get all that kind of coverage. For you as the editor, though, are there any things that you have to consider when you're working on a film project?
So there were only a couple of things, different types of considerations that might happen. The film would run through the telecine process, and then I would get, DNX files. The only difference between a typical production and that is that I was a couple of days behind because the process, takes time. They have to actually develop the film and then get it telecined.
They have to find people who remember how to do that.
Yeah, or even know what the word telecine means, which kids, if you don't know what that means, is literally the process of taking film and putting it on video. But then, I was just cutting on Avid. So that part of it didn't really change. But so we shot 2-perf 35 millimeter, which I didn't even know existed. And that's in the film is in that sort of native 2:3, but I believe in the end it's 2:3:5 aspect ratio. And the only thing that I had to look out for were like light leaks. And there were some. We had some interesting like streaking because we're using half of the frame. Every little bit of light leak is much larger than it would be if you were using the full frame. And so that was, I wouldn't say a challenge because, in some cases we could just blow it up a little bit, but not too much because there was not a lot of wiggle room in a lot of these frames. But also in some cases, those kind of streaks, those kind of light leaks, they actually play into the aesthetic of the film. And so when you see it, if you see it, and I'd love for you to see the film if you haven't, but you'll see in some cases that, some of that is still in the film. So, but yeah, that's a very long-winded way of saying it didn't really change my process as an editor much. And my process, as I may have said before when we talked on the podcast, is it starts with, just watching absolutely all of it. I don't use scripting in the Avid. No knock against it. It's just not the way that I work. I start watching everything and I make my notes and make little markers. I use magenta. That's the color that I use. I have it mapped. It's the 7 key.
Well, you're really getting into the details.
Yeah. So that's how I do it. And that's just, I would say, just like with everything, it's all about the story and it's all about the characters and the performances. But more than any other thing I've ever worked on, every cut was about protecting this performance, this extraordinarily specific and organic performance that Andrea was giving. And I mean, more than any, as in television, a lot of times we're tasked with sucking time out of scenes and, let's just make this go a little faster. Let's take a little time out of this. We have to hit a certain time for the commercials, etc. And so it's, I can suck time out of things, no problem. And in general, you're not compromising a performance. But what we found as we took this movie, which was, I think my first cut was like around 2 hours and 40 minutes, I think, to get this film just under 2 hours, it was so difficult because we found you couldn't just cut a few frames off of every shot and just cut away from her to Mark Maron now. The tighter you cut her performance, the more compromised the performance became. And so it became the labor of editing the film once we had it into like a general shape was finding every possible way to retain her performance and to be able to live with her and breathe with her, because the movie lives and dies on her performance. And we're so much in her world and spending so much time with her that it was all about protecting and nurturing her performance.
Well, let me throw a scene at you so we can apply some of the things you just said.
Sure.
The open of the film, in the way you sort of set up her backstory through a collage of photos, which was, I thought, really brilliantly done because it told you a lot of things that never really get brought up in the film, but you kind of know going in.
Right. Little cameo from yours truly in there, by the way.
As a young kid?
No, we shot all those, and the back of my head is like a child. Leslie is like holding on. That's the back of my head. You only my mom maybe would know that, and I don't even think she caught it. So
you do this great open with the stills, and then you have some newsreel footage of her winning the lottery, and then you cut to 6 years later. And the scene is her being kicked out of the motel where she's been living. And it's kind of a jump cutty. It doesn't play out in real time because, trying to get the movie going. But as you said, she's giving this brilliant performance. You don't want to cheat any of the great work that she's doing. On the other hand, you've got to keep the thing moving. Was that something where that's how you did it and you were perfectly happy with it? Was it something where, hey, Chris, you're 40 minutes longer than we want to be. Let's find some places to speed things along. How did that scene work out in terms of all the things you just told me about, again, performances and them wanting you to cut 40 minutes?
I think it more, so yeah, that's that scene. And in fact, a lot of the style, it's funny. It's weird that I don't know the answer to this question, but I'm fairly confident it was very, no, let me rephrase that. That style, that jump cutty style was absolutely built into the movie that Michael wanted to make. But he would shoot those scenes, they would just shoot. They would shoot a whole take of all the action happening and following her. And then they would shoot another one, but it was very non-traditional coverage. I mean, it wasn't like, okay, we have this side, now we have this side, now we have this angle, now we have a wide shot and a close-up. We didn't have that. And so what I had to do was find the pieces that the moments that were the best moments, and then figure out artful ways to pair them with the other artful moments, which didn't always, it was sometimes a challenge, and I had to use trickery and sleight of hand to make you not notice that things.
Well, you told us about your magenta markers. What did you? Tell us about your sleight of hand.
Just as far as, using move. I mean, I'm sure every editor does this all the time. Just, using movement to obscure a continuity difference, or just to trick your eye, to trick your brain into accepting the natural flow, the natural movement of somebody. But also, I think a big part of the aesthetic, the cutting pattern, and the way that we move through time in the movie is informed by the character. Sort of when you're drinking, when you're drunk, when you're on one, as they say, time can move a little bit differently, and you can remember it in just like this chunk, like where like there's gaps of time that you sort of don't remember. And I know for me, I was very interested in having the film, and the film is designed to be experiential. Like I said, we're just so much with Leslie that I wanted us to be able to feel what Leslie was feeling too. And so to a degree, the editing was informed by that as much as the performance was informed by the editing. It was a very symbiotic relationship that I had with Andrea, who I've met once. I think every editor has that experience where we have these very intense parasocial relationships with people who don't know us at all. But that's the nature of the beast.
That's true.
Yeah.
My favorite scene is one you didn't do much on. She's alone at the bar at the end of the night, and on the jukebox is a Willie Nelson song. The whole thing plays out in real time. There are no edits. We start with a wide shot of her just sort of slumped over the bar. The song plays out. The lyrics are very apropos. I'm sure that's why the song was chosen. And she, in a lot of ways, is reacting to the lyrics, and the camera just sort of tracks down the bar closer and closer and closer. The camera stops, the song ends, and then you wait, and you wait, and then she looks up, and then you cut. Everything rides in that one cut at the end. So tell me about that scene.
I mean, it's funny you say that, because so it was shot. It was intended to be as one shot. There is no other coverage in that scene, and I think there were 8 takes, but I think there were only 4 or 5 complete takes of it. And yeah, I think you said it's like a minute and a half or 2 minutes. And the thing that actually we found that we had to do to make that work was we had some earlier in the film, we hung with her even longer in certain moments. And what we found, I guess, sort of like the shark in Jaws, that like once you scare us, we're looking for it. We found that if we just took a little bit of time out in some of the earlier ones, it made us accept holding on this. It basically earned us the right and the sort of runway to be able to hold in this performance and just be with her. Even in the editing, though, I obviously it can play that way. We use the next to last take, the penultimate take. Is that, I don't even know if that's how you'd say it, but
that is correct. Yes.
But I did do a version, because of course it can play that way. But I'm wanting to show directors, producers, I want people to say, hey, there's other options here. And I cut out earlier, and I did kind of a montagey bit, because the next thing that follows is she leaves the bar, she's wasted, she goes to the home that she used to live in, that would have been the home that she had from her lottery winnings that she lost everything. And she just essentially walks into this house that people live in, has an interaction with a little kid, and just like walks into this house totally drunk, and they're like, hey, why don't you get out of our house? And, who do I need to call for you? And I just sort of advanced us into that using Willie Nelson, knowing it was probably going to be holding in this because that's how Michael wanted it. So you're asking, the question is like, how much work was it to just pick a take? That definitely is work, but I always like to do my due diligence and try other things. But really the work was about setting you up and setting up the audience expectations so that when we actually get to it at that point in the film, you have the patience and you've learned how to watch this particular movie. Like every movie has its own internal pacing and logic, and kind of every film and show is teaching or suggesting to the audience, here's how you watch this particular thing. Like The Bear, which is brilliant, is very different than Andor, which also brilliant. And they both have their own rhythms, and they're both teaching you from the jump, here's how you watch this thing. And so the same is true with any movie, television show. And so the work of it was actually setting you up earlier to pay off this beat and really sit with it and be with her.
Did you specifically think, I'm going to play off of her look? When she looks in a different direction, that's my out?
We experimented with, multiple different edit points. There were some that cut out before she just kind of like looks up, which is where we cut out now. There were some where we cut out a little earlier. There were some where we cut out even later. And it was all about just finding what felt right. And in that particular piece, it was never about, we have to make this movie shorter. It was all about what feels right. Again, that was another one where it was all about protecting this performance and just finding the moment that felt exactly right. And that, where it is right now, is the moment that presented itself to us. And there was a lot of versioning as far as like how long we were with her. And in fact, the sound that's there, like you can hear a clock ticking in the background. That's actually the production audio. In fact, the music is the production audio too. That was playing, on set, and she was really reacting to it. And thank God we were able to get the license for it, because it would have been a real problem if we couldn't. We had a wonderful music supervisor. This is, again, a very low budget movie. They had to go back and ask for more money for some of the music, because music licensing can be very expensive. And I think a lot of people who see the movie would think, well, holy cow, they had a huge music budget. We really didn't. And Buck, our music supervisor, was able to talk to a lot of these places and show them the film and express to them what we were going for. And to their credit and to our good fortune, so many people got on board. The last license that we got that was like a real nail biter was the Hare Krishna cue that plays when Leslie and Sweeney, who's played by Mark Maron, who's just, I've been a Mark Maron fan, I'm not kidding, since the early 90s. I used to watch short attention span theater, and I've followed him all through WTF from the beginning, and I was so blown away by his performance, even in the dailies. So great job, Mark.
Just as a quick aside, I'm glad you mentioned that. Something about comedians, and I'm not just talking about comic actors, but comedians, their ability to do drama. Mm-hmm. Going back to your own other show, Breaking Bad, you have Bill Burr. Something about being a stand-up comic somehow informed. Maybe it's all those years of just taking a beating on the road, but they really know how to do drama.
Oh yeah, and I think what it seemed like Mark did is he just was present, which again I think that might be is a big part of being a stand-up. You have to interact with audience so much in real time in real life, and so it's all about that presence. But just to wrap that story up with the Hare Krishna cue, and I should double check that I'm allowed to say this, but it's owned by the late George Harrison's estate, because I believe he produced it. And, the Beatles are not known for being, or any member of the Beatles are not known for being the least expensive music licenses. And it was in London, and it was really hard to get a hold of the people who hold the license and get them on the phone and then to show them the film and to explain. It's kind of played in a comedic, at first it plays as a comedic beat, but then for us it transcends into this very spiritual moment, which is something that I found in the edit. It it was meant more as kind of a comedy beat that, Royal, the character played by Andre Royo, is, just sort of listening to this music and they laugh at it. But then it's followed by this harrowing withdrawal sequence. And I kept playing the music and it went from diegetic to sort of score. And luckily they saw the film and they agree, they got what we were going for and they gave it their blessing. So
just a quick question going back to the Willie Nelson scene. In any of the iterations of what you played around with, anything about bringing that full and making that go from diegetic to actual needle drop?
In the version that I did, yes. In the version that became a montage, I sort of, the part, I'm trying to remember where I went. It was like, I hope you wouldn't cry. I think I started going into my sort of montagey thing at that point. But again, I did all that work and it played very well, but nothing for me beats the heartbreak of sitting in this moment with her, because that night is a bit of a bottom for her. And, that's ultimately when she decides to, go cold turkey.
Speaking of all the hard work you do and just the blood, sweat, and tears you put into something like this, is it difficult for you, working on a project like this, indie film, yes, but also micro budget, not knowing, you go work on Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad, a billion people are going to see what you do. Something like this, it's like you could be spending the rest of your life explaining to people, hey, there was this movie called To Leslie and it was really great and you should check it out.
It's funny. I didn't really think about it too much until we started submitting it to film festivals, because I believed in the movie and I saw it for what it was, and it didn't necessarily get into all the film festivals. And the question was kind of why, and the feedback was often that it was too long. And there were much longer cuts. We had a cut that was 2 hours, 11 minutes that we absolutely loved. And then we cut it down and we had a 2 hour, 5 minute cut that we were extremely happy with. And in the end, it just made sense for a lot of reasons to get it under that 2 hour mark. And that last pass that we did, and the process of cutting the film, we cut a version of it ultimately in about 2 months time, like for after not even like probably 6 weeks we were working. And then Michael had to go to Albuquerque to direct and executive produce on the final season of Better Call Saul. And I knew the only way that we were going to be able to finish it, because we didn't have access to Clearview or Evercast. Is that what the
Evercast? Yeah.
Called? Yeah. We didn't have access to that or money. And so I knew the only way we were going to be able to finish it, with given his schedule, and I was not starting Better Call Saul for a couple of months. They graciously allowed me to start. I was the last editor to start in that final season, knowing that I was still working with Michael on the film. I packed up my home system, my iMac-based Avid software only, and I packed it up in my car and I moved to Albuquerque, and Michael got like a little house that we lived in together, and we lived there and we worked there, and we were, keeping some very strange hours because he was, prepping and sometimes shooting all day. And, I would be implementing notes all day, and sometimes, he'd get back at 10 at night, and then we'd, work for several hours. And under some circumstances, and I've worked for some very challenging people, directors in my life, and I learned from all of them. If this sounds like, oh God, what a jerk, it wasn't like that at all. It was truly and genuinely a labor of love. I would do it again in a heartbeat, keeping these strange hours. It was an experience unlike anything I'd ever really had, outside of some of the, scrappier things that, as you mentioned, shows like Sorority Forever, or the internet shows that we made when we had a company called Big Fantastic years ago. This sort of ethos, this like doing it all for the project, was the only way it was going to get done. And so, but the very last pass we did through the film was about getting it under 2 hours. And that was very, very difficult. And we, again, protecting her performance, it was about what sections can we lose. And we actually, there was a section at the beginning of the film before she gets kicked out of the motel where you see her as a waitress in a diner, and she's not very good at it. And she's, a drunk. And we sort of get to know her in this, I think it's probably 4 or 5 minutes section before she gets fired for stealing alcohol and drinking at work. And it was a really wonderful sequence, and everybody is fantastic in it, but it was the cleanest lift. And it was a very difficult decision, and I love that stuff, but if you see the film and you hadn't seen any of that stuff, you wouldn't know that it was there.
You described this as a labor of love, and I think that's a perfect way to close this out because that shows up in the film that you all made. Andrea's performance is brilliant, regardless of whatever's been going on with the Academy. Everybody's work is fantastic.
Thanks a lot, Matt, and thanks for yourself shining a light on the film. It, like I said, it's a small movie that I just love. And the good thing is this awards recognition, the distributors did put it out for one more weekend, like a week ago, and I was able to bring a bunch more people to see it on a big screen. And if you're ever able to see it on a big screen, it's a beautifully shot film and it plays really, really well on a big screen. But see it on whatever size screen you have access to. I hope you love it.
Count on it, my man. If there's any justice in the world, the next time the cops pull you over, they'll say, "I love to Leslie. Great work, Chris." I don't know. Did anyone else find it funny when Chris said the first time I was pulled over? Maybe it was just me. Regardless of whichever side of the law Mr. McCaleb finds himself on, he is one terrific storyteller and a joy to speak with. Seriously. If you ever see him on the street, feel free to stop him and say, "Hey Chris, I heard you on The Rough Cut and I feel like I know you already." I'm sure he'd like that. And tell him you loved his work on Sorority Fever. I know I would like that. And I would also like to thank him for taking a few minutes to talk with us and take us behind the scenes of this amazing little movie. It really is that good, and so is he. Do you have your iMac packed up in the car ready to go to Albuquerque to cut a micro-budget indie film? Well, before you go, make sure you have the latest version of Avid Media Composer loaded on it. Not only can it fit easily into your micro-budget, it can give you the incredible editing power you'll need to make the most of the amazing performances that I'm sure you'll be getting from your actors. So act now and head on over to avid.com where you can sign up for a super low-cost monthly or annual subscription. What did I say today was? February 13th? That's right. Well, happy Valentine's Day if I don't see you tomorrow. And let's be honest, I won't. But here is a big virtual bouquet of roses from me, just to say I love you and can't thank you enough for checking out the podcast. Until next time, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.